Manufacturing Consent, The Political Economy of the Mass Media, 1988, by Edward S. Herman and Noam Chomsky critically examines the role of mass media in shaping public perception and advancing the interests of powerful elites. The authors argue that mass media does not operate as an independent check on power but instead serves as a tool for the powerful, especially corporations, governments, and other vested interests. They build their case around a framework known as the propaganda model, which describes how media organizations, through their ownership, funding, and institutional pressures, shape the news and information that the public receives. This model challenges the liberal ideal of a free press, which is supposed to act as a watchdog for democracy and a forum for the exchange of diverse opinions. Herman and Chomsky identify 5 key filters that determine the content of news. The first is the size, ownership, and profit orientation of the mass media, where a small number of large corporations control the majority of media outlets. This concentration means that news and information are often produced by a few powerful players, and their editorial decisions are shaped by commercial interests rather than public service. The second filter is the reliance on advertising as the primary revenue source for most media outlets. Since media companies depend heavily on advertising revenue, they cater to the interests of advertisers, who typically include large corporations and government agencies, reinforcing consumerism and avoiding topics that could alienate wealthy sponsors. The third filter concerns the reliance on government and corporate sources for news content. Journalists are incentivized to rely on official sources to ensure credibility and access to information, leading to a homogenization of news coverage. The fourth filter, known as flak, refers to the negative feedback or criticism from powerful institutions when the media stray from their interests. This flak can take various forms, from corporate lawsuits to organized campaigns aimed at discrediting journalists or media outlets. The fear of flak serves as a powerful deterrent to investigative journalism. Finally, the fifth filter is the ideological framework that guides media narratives. In the book's context, this is the Cold War consensus surrounding anti-communism, which was used to justify military interventions and the protection of economic interests abroad, regardless of the human or ethical costs. Advertising plays a crucial role in shaping the content and structure of the media. Since mass media outlets depend heavily on advertising revenue, they are more likely to produce content that aligns with the interests of their advertisers, thus avoiding criticism of corporations, governments, and other powerful entities. Media outlets are also incentivized to produce content that appeals to a mass audience, further reinforcing the interests of advertisers, who want to reach as many people as possible with their messages. This dependence on advertising revenue leads to a system where media companies are primarily concerned with profitability rather than providing critical or independent journalism. Most news stories are sourced from a narrow range of institutions, primarily government agencies, large corporations, and public relations firms. This centralization of sources means that the media often report events and issues from the perspective of those in power, leaving little room for independent or critical viewpoints. Journalists are incentivized to rely on official sources to ensure the credibility of their reporting, which in turn leads to the reproduction of dominant power structures in the media. This reliance on official sources often results in a lack of investigative journalism and limited opportunities for alternative narratives to emerge in the public sphere. Flak is a term used to describe the negative responses or criticism directed toward media organizations when they stray from the interests of powerful institutions. This criticism can come in many forms, including lawsuits, smear campaigns, or organized pressure from interest groups. The threat of flak acts as a powerful constraint on media outlets, encouraging them to conform to the interests of powerful elites to avoid backlash. This filter ensures that critical voices are often silenced or marginalized, and investigative journalism that challenges the status quo becomes increasingly rare. In the book's context, the authors discuss how the mass media were complicit in promoting an ideological consensus that supported anti-communism during the Cold War. The media worked to frame global events through the lens of this ideological framework, which justified military interventions and other actions that served U.S. corporate and geopolitical interests. This ideological bias in the media shaped public perceptions and helped to create a sense of fear and urgency about the perceived communist threat. By doing so, the media played a role in legitimizing U.S. foreign policy, even when it involved questionable or harmful actions abroad. Public relations firms play a significant role in shaping news content. These firms, which are often employed by corporations, governments, and other influential organizations, create content that is designed to promote a specific agenda. The media, reliant on these PR efforts for stories and information, often act as passive conduits for the messages being conveyed. This creates a situation where the distinction between news and propaganda becomes blurred, with media organizations increasingly reproducing the narratives crafted by powerful interest groups. Herman and Chomsky used the Vietnam War as a case study to illustrate how the media can be complicit in advancing the political agenda of the state. The media initially played a crucial role in garnering public support for the war by framing it as a necessary fight against the spread of communism. Even when public opinion shifted and the war became increasingly unpopular, the media were slow to challenge the official narrative. This demonstrates how media outlets can perpetuate government propaganda and fail to critically examine the consequences of military interventions. The authors extend the concept of manufacturing consent to U.S. foreign policy, particularly in regions like Latin America and Southeast Asia. They argue that the media consistently supported military interventions and coup attempts that served the interests of American corporations, often downplaying the human costs or suppressing alternative narratives. The media were complicit in shaping public opinion to favor actions that were ultimately harmful to the populations of the countries involved, further illustrating the ways in which media serve the interests of elites rather than the broader public. Herman and Chomsky challenge the idea that mass media in democratic societies function as a check on power. They argue that instead of promoting a diversity of views and holding those in power accountable, the media often reinforce the status quo by narrowing the scope of debate and dissent. By shaping public opinion to align with elite interests, the media help to maintain a political and economic system where power is concentrated in the hands of a few corporations, government agencies, and other powerful entities. In this sense, the media often function as a tool of social control rather than as a means of promoting democratic values. In the final chapters of the book, the authors argue that a healthy democracy requires a media system that is independent and diverse, one that serves the public interest rather than the interests of powerful elites. They call for the creation of alternative media outlets that can provide a platform for critical voices and offer a more balanced view of events. Only through a more democratic and independent media system, they suggest, can citizens be better informed and able to make decisions that reflect their true interests, rather than those of the powerful few who control the flow of information. Ultimately, manufacturing consent provides a powerful critique of the mass media, arguing that they function less as a mechanism for informing the public and more as a tool for reinforcing the power structures that dominate society. By identifying the mechanisms through which consent is manufactured, Herman and Chomsky invite readers to question the media narratives they encounter and to recognize the forces shaping their understanding of the world. The book calls for a more critical approach to media consumption, one that is aware of the ways in which information is filtered and manipulated by those in positions of power.